With the Cleveland Browns set to open training camp in 10 days, there's certainly some questions on the offensive side of the ball, the defensive side of the ball. We'll try to answer some of those questions here. And we will get to the Cleveland Browns Mount Rushmore. All that more. Your latest Locked On Browns. Your host, Jeff Lloyd, joined by Sports Illustrated's Pete Smith.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound, LGB on the LOB, the Locked On Browns podcast, brought to you by the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Again, that phrase, your team every day, as a lot of national publications are going away from day-to-day individual sports teams coverage. Locked On Browns, Locked On Podcast Network. This is what we do all day, every day. Appreciate everybody who makes Locked On Browns their first listen. And I suggest you all join the everyday crowd by subscribing to the Locked On Browns YouTube page. Notifications on, so when the content drops, you're all there to absorb it. Locked On Browns, always available, always free wherever you get your podcasts. Joined today by Browns Digest, Sports Illustrated, Mr. Pete Smith at _Pete Smith _. We're going to get to, some questions here. We just finished the offensive preview series, head of training camp here. So obviously some questions relative to the offense, some questions on the defense training camp. We'll get to that. Hopefully we can answer some of those questions going into the training camp preview series that will begin towards the end of this week and actually close out next week. So that, and of course, we will do a Cleveland Browns Mount Rushmore. There is kind of a twist to this for me, and we'll get to that in segment 3 because the Browns have some really, really solid players on their roster right now. And the question would be, could that Mount Rushmore change somewhere here over the next few seasons with maybe some players being added in? Pete, going through this here on the offensive side of the ball, and you look at the offensive line and, any opportunity you get to run it back, and that's not always good for everybody, but the Cleveland Browns, obviously, the one thing that's been solid here for years now, and certainly during the Barry Stefanski era, has been, offensive line working as a unit. There's always been maybe one guy within the unit that wasn't, basically on par with the rest. And I think we all know who we're talking about here. But it is going to be a new system, and it is going to be, obviously a system now where we're going to see probably a lot more pass blocking than we've seen, in the past year, as the Browns are going to transition to an offense that, will be, headlined by Deshaun Watson. You still have a player like Nick Chubb, of course, but trying to basically get more into, in line with what the better offenses in the NFL do. Are there any concerns here as this offensive line, I'm not going to say gets away from what they do best, because most of these guys have always been solid as two-way players on the offensive line. But there is that thought process that, this team now and these guys are, going to be basically in pass pro a lot more than we've seen in the past.
I mean, run blocking wise, they're going to run outside zone and they're going to run a lot of counters and power and stuff like that. But they are going to do more inside zone, which is something that they added the second half of last year, because that's going to be a big focal point as part of their RPO stuff. Inside zone is a very easy way to do some of that stuff. And, partly because he was hurt, but I also don't think Wyatt Teller made a great adjustment there. I'm curious to see how much better he is with full camp and everything, how much more comfortable he is, how much more comfortable Jack Conklin is, well removed from any knee issue. And then, you mentioned Jedrick Wills. How much better is he going to be? I mean, it is at a point where, yes, he's guaranteed to get his 5th-year option. The question is does he want to get it in Cleveland, or is he going to end up getting it somewhere else?
You don't want that Cincinnati Bengals situation.
Right. And, it's not difficult to trade him. There are teams that are going to need him, but still, it would help the Browns out if he just plays up to the level he played as a rookie. And Ethan Oposich, had a great year. Is he going to be that great again? I mean, there's a lot of reasons to believe he will be. I think he's a really good fit, particularly with Deshaun Watson being as big as he is, being as tall as he is. That could be really helpful in pass pro. And then I have no question for Joe Bitonio, future Hall of Famer, He's the man.
There's no question. It's always, Joel Bitonio. And it's the funniest thing for a guy, who's been here as long as he has, for the star player that he is within the league. There's always he doesn't get talked about that much. Well, he's a left guard and he's a damn good one. And it's not like there's not really much more to put to it. The guy's on a Hall of Fame trajectory with his career. We're still here, Pete, 10 days away, obviously, from the trip down to West Virginia in the Greenbrier. And there's a lot of speculation, a lot of chatter, and we've talked about it for months. It's that running back room. And, the question would be are they truly in on bringing in a veteran running back? Or is this something essentially where they're going to look to address this if maybe it's a little bit of a slow start for Jerome Ford? But even still, it does seem for many, and, if you put it in these terms, this team went to camp last year with Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt, Dearness Johnson, and obviously, Jerome Ford and others. And now all of a sudden you're just going to go to camp with Nick Chubb, which is more than fine, of course, and Jerome Ford based off of, as you always like to say, which one of his 8 carries last year was your favorite?
All 12 yards, baby.
The big one against Washington, by the way, was the favorite, the long one.
Yes. So the Browns have what I would call a soft free agency deadline, which is the 21st of July, just 9 days away, because that next day is when they go to the Greenbrier. Veterans, it's going to be a question of who's willing to make the numbers work. I don't think the Browns are going to move on their offer. So it's entirely a question of, are you good with our offer? If that doesn't happen, the Browns probably won't sign a running back until at least August. They will see what they have. Obviously, they're really, positive about what they think Jerome Ford's going to do, but it really is about the Hassan Halls of the world. Are they going to do enough to sort of go, well, I don't know if we need it. And then if they come back and now you're back and now it's July 31st and into August, then you can do that, because it's not as if the Browns necessarily need to get, as much as they'd love to have the roster done. It's not as a pressing issue. They can get a ton of reps out of Chubb now and then bring somebody in and sort of taper him off a little bit, or just rest him when the hitting really gets going and get somebody else more comfortable. But it allows them to sort of see what they've got. I mean, ultimately, I still think somebody else is coming. It's just a question of when. And there are a number of talented options. And then the other part of that is, let's use Dalvin Cook as an example. He signs with the Miami Dolphins. Well, somebody else from the Miami Dolphins is not going to be on that team. Is it going to be former Brown Raheem Mostert? Is it going to be Jeff Wilson? And then does that interest the Browns? Do the Dolphins then trade him for a player the Browns are potentially more than willing to move on from, or a conditional 7th or something like that? And then the Browns get their depth that way. Because if we look at what Hassan Hall does well, he's a sprinter who can potentially take open space like that. And that's what those guys do. So there's an extra layer to that room.
And, there is the factor with Hassan Hall is, there is the ability to contribute as a returner, which, certainly gives him, a second avenue to, ensure, getting a solid opportunity to make this final 53. But I think for, everybody here, I think we all agree on the same. Let's hope the Browns make a move here because they want to make a move, not because the Cleveland Browns are forced to make a move. Obviously, that would be the key to all of this here. We're going to continue here. We'll flip it up in a second here. We'll go to the second segment. Obviously, we're going to address some of these questions here on the defensive side of the ball, because there is a lot, and I mean a lot, of newness. We'll get to all that. Sports Illustrated's Pete Smith joining your host here, Jeff Lloyd, your latest Locked On Browns. We'd like to welcome in and are very thankful for our new sponsors, the good folks at eBay Motors. Our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Football host Vinny Iyer to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week, all season long. Whether you're prepping for a draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. So with draft prep underway for the upcoming season, let's see who Vinny has picked out for us on this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. When making the first overall pick in fantasy football drafts in 2023, 49ers running back Christian McCaffrey is a guaranteed fit. A healthy McCaffrey is a guaranteed to see well more than 300 touches again in his first full season in San Francisco, and is a centerpiece of the 49ers offensive engine. McCaffrey checks all the boxes, including his talent and usage, high floor and ceiling, run with CMC is the guaranteed fit at number 1 for a smooth ride to another year of big numbers. Vinny Iyer is going to help you with your fantasy football championship, and eBay Motors knows the championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. Same with your vehicle. With the eBay Guaranteed Fit and over 122 million parts and accessories for your vehicle right at your fingertips, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Air filters, brakes, batteries, taillights, alternators, shocks, struts, you name it. eBay Motors has it. And they'll make sure it's the right fit on your car, because eBay Guaranteed Fit helps you understand exactly what part you need for your vehicle the first time. So go forth, switch gears, crank the AC, and say goodbye to sweating in your if your ride needs a little fixing up. Because right now, you know you'll always be set up for success from the get-go. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, everything your vehicle is calling for is just a click away. For the parts and accessories that fit your vehicle, just look for the green check. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices at ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only, and exclusions do apply. Continuing on here, segment 2, your host, Jeff Lloyd, joined today by Sports Illustrated's Pete Smith. As we get into some questions here ahead of training camp, we discussed the offensive side of the ball in segment 1. We're going to get to the defensive side of the ball here in segment 2. Now, Pete, for me, and the newness here, there's no denying it. There's no mistaking it. Obviously, a new defensive coordinator, a lot of new defensive coaches, a whole bunch of new players brought in on the defensive line and the interior. Players brought in as edge defenders. Linebacker room, that's one that has not obviously been much tinkering. But in the secondary, obviously, 2 new veteran safeties brought into this mix. So I think my first question here is, and this is always something that's talked about, and we certainly talked about it. There is a lot of newness here, and as promising as the newness is on paper, the question itself is just that. It's a lot of newness.
Sure. I mean, they brought in a whole lot of new players, and the argument from their standpoint is, 1, they feel like they upgraded, especially on the defensive line. And then 2, the players where you might question if it's an upgrade or not are arguably a better fit for what the Browns want to do. For example, Juan Thornhill is a true deep center fielder, and that's what Jim Schwartz wants in that safety position at free. Defensive line, that's the whole deal. But given the way that Jim Schwartz coaches, it doesn't feel like you necessarily have to be cohesive other than when they're running stunts and things. I don't really see that as a problem. It's more of a question of where things are going to shake out at safety. Like, you have Rodney McLeod. How is he going to fit alongside Grant Delpit and Juan Thornhill? Because he's been a very good player. Likewise, Greg Newsome has every reason to be, is going to be in the slot quite a bit. But when they have 2 corners on the field, is it as simple as, of course, it's Greg Newsome across from Denzel Ward, or is Martin Emerson going to keep coming on and just make his case? I think there are reasons to believe that Newsome should be that dude, but I don't think Emerson's going to be like, oh, you have it. So those are going to be good competitions to have. I think that gives the Browns so many options on how they want to cover opponents and just the varying ways, because they have so much depth now in competition. And then linebacker wise, yes, we look at this and we go, of course, day one, Anthony Walker and JOK are going to be those dudes. But when is Anthony Walker going to be full go? And in the meantime, Sione Takitaki, we don't know when he's going to be available. There's some competition that could be going on within the depth. Jacob Phillips would like to make this team. You've got, some of these undrafted free agents they've brought in. You've got guys they brought in that may have more of a special teams role, and they've got to figure this out because they may only end up keeping 5. So that's going to be a heated battle. I mean, the thing the Browns want and seemingly have achieved on that side of the ball, with the notable exception of defensive tackle, is tons and tons of competition. May the best man win type thing.
Because you could get into a situation here, and obviously, look, I think there's a lot of pressure on JOK, because I think JOK is ideally what they think could be the perfect guy to fit in this, certainly when it transitions to nickel and to dime. But as you mentioned, with the availability questions of Anthony Walker, or not even maybe availability, but when he's truly going to be Anthony Walker again, the availability questions of Sione Takitaki, players like, of course, Tony Fields, and certainly, my guy, Jacob Phillips. Now, if these guys get the opportunity with an open door and perform well, then all of a sudden, this does make things a little bit cloudy, because obviously you're keeping Anthony. Obviously, you're keeping Sione Takitaki. JOK is a lock. And then it gets to this weird situation. Well, some of these guys now are vying for legitimate playing time on defense. And what do we do now that we invested in 2 special teamers here? And it could make for a little bit of a murky situation at the linebacker spot.
True, although it wouldn't surprise me if a guy like Matt Adams was signed to be signed to the practice squad. You give him that bonus for the sake of, we wanted you here, and now that you're here, why don't you go ahead and sign on the practice squad type deal. But yeah, look, I mean, that's the thing. Jacob Phillips is a talented player. He just had 3 season-ending injuries, and granted, he looked pretty bad at times on the field last year, though the Pittsburgh Steelers game was a nice little bright spot for him. Jacob Phillips.
He always ends on a high note. He always finds a way to end on a high note, Jacob.
Tony Fields wasn't great, but he also won a football game basically by himself. So you've got all these guys, and if those guys play out, I mean, there's always this talk about, well, the Browns should sign another veteran, and I keep going, where do you want to put him? But Jordan Kunaszyk has drawn a ton of praise from like Jim Schwartz, and it sounds like they want him to be on the field. Maybe he's that Sam if there's questions about Sione Takitaki and that type of stuff. But ultimately, the Browns defense seems to be set to play with as few as possible. So that's the other question with this group. I mean, like I said, Walker and JOK are your guys. They have every reason to have great seasons with the things put out in front of them. But yeah, I mean, let's see how this shakes out, especially if those guys aren't available all the time, or the Browns just are sitting there going, you guys are good. Let's see what else we have behind you.
Yeah. I mean, obviously you're always trying to build the perfect room, but you're in this instance, you're trying to build the perfect room to, hopefully not play these guys so you can play more, obviously, defensive linemen and secondary players. Getting to the edge position. Now, we were in this, spot a year ago, Pete, and it was obviously Myles, Jadeveon, and then a lot of youth afterwards. And Chase Winovich. It seems like Chase Winovich was forever and a year ago. But now where you get into this and you're veteran heavy with Myles, obviously with Zadarius Smith, obviously with Ogba Okoronkwo. And then all of a sudden you're in a weird spot with a player like Isaiah Thomas, who was a guy last year as a 7th round pick who showed a little bit of promise, took meaningful reps. And now all of a sudden this guy comes in this year and he already, could possibly be the odd man out. And it's pretty much through no fault of his own.
Right. I mean, this is where you want to be. You want to be in a situation where you are cutting players that are good, or trading players if you have to, and potentially getting some of those guys on the practice squad. Like Isaiah Thomas could potentially be a guy who just doesn't make it, and then they get him as a freebie on the practice squad, which would be ideal for the Browns. Same thing with,
and then and a guy that you trust and can give legitimate game reps if, God forbid, somebody else is unable to go.
Yeah, I mean, you activate him at least twice a season just so you can go kill Jonah Williams, and then you're good. But look, the Browns have a sweet setup here. They have the best defensive end in football. They have Zadarius Smith, who's a veteran, and then they have Ogba Okoronkwo, who is the ascending talent, so to speak. It's not as if, Okoronkwo is sort of like finished and done. He's a player who can get better, and the situation is really right for him to be maximized this season, especially when you get to situations where Zadarius Smith is kicking inside and Okoronkwo is now rushing opposite Garrett, and all the different things they can do with that. So yeah, it's a great situation. You've got Isaiah McGuire, who's a rookie. You're curious to see how he does. How's Alex Wright do in year 2? He's sort of a wild card in some ways because, he struggled as a rookie, which isn't terribly surprising given where he came from, how raw he was, and playing at UAB. But if he can just be an effective run stopper with his size and length, he's going to be eventually 280 pounds. He's going to be the same size as Myles Garrett. If he can use it correctly, then he can play more rundowns and keep those pass rushers fresher and allow them to just be more, keep keep up the pressure as much as possible. It's the same thing with a guy like Isaiah McGuire. I don't want to sit here and have to rely on a 3rd round pick, but it's an opportunity for him to find a niche, find a role, and be a good player. And then, you end up with situations where you've got good players. Isaiah Thomas could potentially be, if somebody, a team suffers an injury, you could potentially trade him. He could be somebody who ends up on the practice squad. They've got a number of guys right now where you're sitting there going, I would love to have that guy back in the practice squad. And those are players that just enhance your value and make sure you're not in a situation where you are just dead and looking for guys who can give you anything, and they just don't have them like they did last year at times, especially when Clowney and Garrett were both out at the same time.
And there's no question. A lot of it, a lot of it is going to, come down to taking to a new system. And, you're going to be asked to do some things that you're not, I don't want to say not comfortable with, but not familiar with as far as your time here. And there's always going to be a question or two, and there's certainly going to be a player or two that are going to make, things a lot more cloudy than if we were all just sit down right now and say, well, who's going to make this team, in the secondary, obviously the linebacker position, the defensive line position. And there's a lot of people that are going to be on the fringe, and they certainly have the capabilities to make the case for themselves. Again, this is the position, of course, that you do want to be in here. We're going to get to segment 3 here. We're going to get to, he put together a Cleveland Browns Mount Rushmore. Look, he's been around this a lot longer than I have. So I wanted, an open-ended opinion, so to speak, but there is a caveat to it, and we're going to get to all that here in segment 3. Jeff Lloyd, your latest Locked On Browns, joined by Sports Illustrated's Pete Smith. As always, I want to thank everybody who makes Locked On Browns their first listen every single day. Join the everyday crowd by subscribing to the Locked On Browns YouTube channel. Have your notifications on so when everything drops, you're all there to absorb it. Locked On Browns is always available, always free, wherever you get your podcasts. And it's not just a slogan, it's a way of business. And it's a way of business that a lot of people are starting to go away from. Your favorite team, your local team, everyday coverage. Well, your team every day. It's just not a slogan here at Locked On. It is the brand of Locked On. Pete, I asked you to put together a Cleveland Browns Mount Rushmore, and the one you put together, I do like, and there is for me a reason behind it, and we're going to get to that after you rattle off here who you put on there, because there are several names, in my opinion, that might not be too far off if this team could inevitably ever basically get to the Holy Grail that could maybe alter the way this mount is going to be set up.
Right. So my 4, keeping this only to players, Otto Graham, Jim Brown, Ozzie Newsome, and Joe Thomas. If Otto Graham had played his whole career as number 14, all those guys would be the greatest player of their jersey number ever. With all due respect to Dan Fouts, Otto Graham is better. Ozzie Newsome is the best 82 that's ever played. Joe Thomas is the best 73. Although, to be fair, it's him and John Hanna. It's just, you have the greatest guard of all time and arguably the greatest tackle of all time.
And tackle at Trump's guard, but go ahead.
Jim Brown's 32. It's not even a question. So if you look at it through those lenses, I mean, it's hard to argue with that beyond sort of the spiritual quality. I mean, I'm sure somebody's out there who's going to make an argument for Clay Matthews because he played 115 seasons for this team, but and still, making his case to make the Hall of Fame. But those are the greatest at their respective positions. And I'm going to jump the gun for you. Myles Garrett, as long as he doesn't drop dead, will be the greatest 95 ever to play the game, once he passes Richard Dent with 137.5 sacks. Unfortunately for Joe Bitonio, he picked the same number as me and Joe Green. He's going to end up in the Hall of Fame too. But certainly you can make the case that those guys have a chance to insert themselves into the conversation. Certainly, it's Myles Garrett has the easily the best shot to make it. He's already one of the best players in this team's history, as people are sleeping on it right now. As long as he keeps playing, he's going to blow away some of those things. Given what the Browns have this season, he should set, injuries and everything considered, he should have the best season of his career. He should set records at various things. and could easily hit 20 sacks this year just because the Browns are so much better around him. He got 16 sacks with no help last year. He's got a ton of help this year. So 20 looks very attainable from that standpoint. And he missed time last year.
But here's also the thing about it this year, Pete. And, I do have a couple of names, obviously, and obviously one significant, but we'll get to the one on the offensive side of the ball. There is probably for the first time in maybe forever in Myles Garrett's time here where it's not going to be, well, we gave you one rep off. Can you get back on the field? Like, there is an opportunity here for Jim Schwartz to be smart and intelligent about this. You want to know what? The team's got the ball. They're still at the 30. Myles, you're here. You're with me. They got the ball at the Myles. I know you're ready to go. Stay here with me. All right. They crossed me the field. Myles, you know what, Myles? They're now at our 38. Go ahead. There's not going to be this and everybody, oh, well, Myles gets rest. No, it's enough for him to get to the sideline, take his helmet off for a second, get a drink, catch his breath. But by all means, we want you on the field 2 reps from now. There's an opportunity here now. And, if Myles says he's good to go, he's going to go, obviously. But there's a chance here to be, I don't want to say pitch count or anything of that nature. But it's, and I always remember this from the Yankee glory days of, Joe Torre, anytime anybody was dinged up, they'd come in. And the day they came in and said, you know what, I'm good to go today. And Joe would say, you know what, one more day. Because I'd rather there's the opportunity then for them here to, I don't want to say limit or use any of that, but just be more smart, more conservative, and a lot of opportunity to get him on the field and get 100% of him on more reps, as opposed to in the past where we saw poor Myles, where he'd play almost every snap and then getting flack. Go, wow, Myles Garrett looks gassed in the fourth quarter. Well, when you play 68 out of 70 snaps, it's going to happen.
Well, one of the biggest myths about Myles Garrett is this idea that he doesn't have fourth quarter sacks, or game-changing sacks. It's insane. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers last year, he killed Tom Brady to set up the game-winning drive or the game-tying drive and then ultimately win the game. There's any number of those throughout his career, but people sort of forget just how dominant he is. But yeah, look, I mean, you look at not Myles Garrett, you look at Nick Chubb, and his whole career, he's over 5 yards a carry. But when he's used about 17 times a game, it's like 5.9 yards per carry or 5.6 plus. Yep. Versus when he's got 20 some carries and it's like 5. And on some level, you're going, well, I'm sorry he loses one, maybe half a yard or a yard, but it's worth giving him those extra carries because he's still getting 5 yards a pop. That is sort of what you end up with Myles Garrett. Now, the issue you run into is obviously not only are you sort of getting, even if it's slightly less, effectiveness, you are also now at greater risk of injury. And that's obviously a bigger concern because the Browns do feel they're good. And obviously, look, they have to win the games to get into the postseason. But as it becomes what we all hope, clear that they're a good team, and let's envision a world where the Browns are putting teams away in the fourth quarter, they can sort of take guys out or not have to squeak out to the end. You instead of you running into a situation like last year where you piss away the Jets game, you have now closed it out and made it very apparent that the game is over. Like the first time Myles Garrett saw the Jets and killed Sam Darnold to close out that game in the fourth quarter. Like, that's what you want to have happen. And now the Browns have more of a closing ability with this defense. So you should have more of those situations. You should be able to control the clock more in those situations when you have leads and some of those things. So yes, you want to find the sweet spot. Where's the perfect amount of reps to get him? And do we have enough guys that can allow him to rest and not have the defense just completely fall apart?
100%. And it's having faith in the guys around him. Obviously, probably something that, made the Zadarius Smith, deal come to fruition after you had free agency, after you'd had the draft, and an opportunity to just lengthen and understanding it's 17 games, but hopefully it's 20. And that's probably the thought process here. He is Pete Smith, Browns Digest, Sports Illustrated. Pete's a friend. Obviously, I'll never lie. I'll never hide from that. But still, one of my favorite sites, one of my favorite content producers over there, Browns Digest and SportsIllustrated.com. So make it part of your rotation. It's certainly a part of mine. Make sure you're following Pete at _Pete Smith _ myself at Jeff Lloyd. Jeff Lloyd at Jeff _LJ _Lloyd. The show at Locked On Browns. We appreciate everybody who makes Locked On Browns their first listen every single day. The everydayers, you guys are the best. Join the everydayers. Subscribe to the YouTube page. Locked On Browns is always available, always free, wherever you get your podcasts. We've got preview episodes out on the offensive line, on the quarterback position. We'll switch back over to the defensive side of the ball tomorrow to begin the training camp preview over there. Appreciate everybody for being along for the ride. This has been your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound LGB on ELOB. Let's go Browns.